Thank you for visiting Past the Wire TV, the YouTube channel of PastTheWire.com.
The best Breeders' Cup seminar on the internet. Crush Racing's biggest days with expert insights from the Pick Six King himself, Jonathan Stettin. Register now for the Past the Wire Breeders' Cup seminar presented by AmWager. Thursday, November 3rd at 6:30. Visit PastTheWire.com and reserve your seat today.
History remembers moments of extraordinary strength, skill, and determination. True greatness is forged by those who fulfill their destiny.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Unfiltered on Past the Wire TV. Although Michael Wilson, my co-host, and I, and even Jim Gazzale, who has been subbing, Michael Vale, who has been on, Bill Gotama, don't want to leave anybody out. We've been talking a lot of Breeders' Cup, Tommy Massis, Keeneland Dan. We've had a lot of people on, but let's call this the official first Past the Wire Breeders' Cup special coverage brought to you by AmWager, where you can bet the Breeders' Cup, and Forza Bloodstock, where you can potentially buy a Breeders' Cup winner. So with that said, Mr. Wilson, you are in Lexington. I am not yet in Lexington, but if all goes according to plan, I will be sometime tomorrow. So looking forward.
No, awesome. Hopefully it's warm. Hopefully it warms up by the time you get here. It's been very chilly in the mornings. Everybody's in their winter outfits, trying to stay warm, huddled on the rails. We watch all these Breeders' Cup horses train. It seems like there are purple saddle towels everywhere. It's kind of like everywhere you turn, there's a purple saddle towel coming out of some barn. So the horses are here. As we saw this morning, Baffert worked his group this morning at Santa Anita. I believe they ship tomorrow to arrive. They wanted to finish their work in California before getting here, which we talked about, horses breezing and how they come into races, and that's typically Bob's game plan. It seems like Mike McCarthy put in a couple works with his horses out in California as well, and then those horses will be shipping probably all on the same flight.
Now, an interesting thing, and I might as well just, take this swing right off the bat. We don't have to talk about it first, but it's definitely something I want to address. The media coverage you see pre-Breeders' Cup on the workouts, and they show a lot of workouts. You really, have to commend the Breeders' Cup for making the workouts available for everybody to see, even those of us who aren't there. I've watched so many, I can't keep track of them all. I'm taking notes. Finally, I stopped taking notes. I'm just like, giving check marks or minus marks. But most of the media doesn't give any minus marks. What you hear out there is everybody's working great, everybody went good, everybody's looking great, everybody worked just the way the trainer wanted. A couple of hundred horses entered for Friday and Saturday in the Breeders' Cup. I can't imagine everyone is going perfectly, just exactly the way the trainer wanted. Some of them had to not work good. Some of them had to not do what exactly the trainer wanted. Everybody can't be going great. And to me, I'd rather hear who's not working so good, who's not working as good as he was going into his prior race, who's not working as good at his last workout, than the same, fluff, nonsense, Candyland, everybody's going great, everybody's going great. They're racehorses. They're not all, even at this level, they're not all working at the top of their game. Am I correct or incorrect?
I think you're correct. I think a lot of it is trying to time these horses to peak around the Breeders' Cup. Some are peaking, some are not. Some are doing better than others in different stables and at different stages. The one thing I can tell you is the matchup that everybody's been waiting for. Both those horses look perfect. I saw both Life is Good and Flightline Breeze this morning. I don't think either horse could be coming into the race in any better shape. Both of them looked fantastic. Flightline obviously looked extremely impressive. I'm kind of on his bandwagon now. I mean, he is kind of the horse of the, I don't know, century, but he is the now horse, and definitely looked it when he was breezing this morning, and Life is Good was very impressive. And when you look at the two and you really look at the two, you can look at Life is Good and say, there's another gear there, and there's another gear there with Life is Good if you let him out a little bit. So it'll be really interesting to see those two. I think they're both a cut above at this stage. Flightline, I think, might be a little bit of a cut above of Life is Good, but at least that matchup in the Classic, those two horses are doing phenomenal.
Right, and that, again, you're a trainer. I'm just handicapper, better student of the game kind of guy. But even to my eye, both of those horses looked like they were coming in to my eye absolutely perfectly. And I was impressed with Flightline. I had seen Life is Good more than I have seen Flightline, but I was not only impressed with how Flightline, gets around the racetrack in the morning, but also with his attitude, his air. I mean, I think he's realized now he's good at what he does, you know what I mean? And I think he knows his job, and he's like, I know, he looks like, he looks like the favorite and acts like the favorite and looks like he knows he's the favorite, and he's the one they'll have to beat. Is there anybody that caught your eye? And let's not throw anybody, to the wolves here. So we're not going to say, working bad, okay? But is there anybody who you thought could have been going better, or you've seen at times go better or look better?
Yeah, I think, interestingly enough, and I think we've talked about Chad Brown's 3 grass fillies, and how they beat each other at different times in the year, Regal Glory and in Italian. And I don't know why I'm blanking on the third one. But, he's got those top 3 fillies that keep kind of bouncing around which one's best on the day. And what I can say is, right now, from what I've seen, Regal Glory might have regressed a little bit. I think in Italian is the one of those 3 fillies that he's got that's doing the best right now. I mean, I watched her work, I think I watched all 3 of them work the last 2 days. And that filly definitely is taking the step forward, looks the best out of the group of the 3. Her coat looks great. Her stride looks, flawless. Regal Glory looks like she might be taking a step back. And that's where I see. And I know everybody's always thought she's the better filly. And by all means, I think she's an exceptional filly.
Not everybody. I've always kind of leaned a little bit in Italian, but
right. So in Italian, of those girls are going forward. Christina Blacker, I mean, hats off to her to say this. She did mention that Jack Christopher looks a little crabby when he warms up and when he gets going, and he does. He's not the smoothest mover in the world. He's a little choppy when he gets on the racetrack, when he jogs to warm up, he gallops, and he's kind of a little bit stiff as he goes off. And the more he does, the more he warms up, and then the more he kind of turns into himself. His work.
It's interesting that Chad has chosen the sprint as opposed to the mile with him based on that observation.
Well, and that's typically what you do with a horse, right? If you if you have trouble training them the way you need to train them to keep them fit to go the mile distance, which potentially could be a reason why they're doing that. As they say, and granted, at Keeneland, you have a 1-turn mile. right? Or no, do we have
Yeah,
a,
no,
yeah,
two-turn mile.
it's a 2-turn mile. It's 2-turn mile. So Jack Christopher is undefeated at 1 turn. He's lost at 2 turns. So that's the other question. But yes, when you have horses that take a little while to warm up, it's much easier to sprint them because you don't have to work on them as hard. You don't have to push them as hard. They stay fitter, easier for the task that you're putting them at hand. I will say when he did work today, it was a very good work. It was a very impressive work. I've only seen Jackie's Warrior. I haven't caught his breezes yet, so I don't know where he's at. And when you look at it, the sprint might be the easier route this year. You know, it's not a sprint where you have some monster that everybody's concerned about going in the sprint. And so, you know, Jackie's Warrior didn't fire on the Breeders' Cup last year. And so, and he's had a misfire up in Saratoga earlier this year. So the question is he vulnerable? And are they trying to take advantage of that with Jack Christopher? The work looked great. That's all I can say was the work looked great. But when you get this horse on the racetrack and he warms up, you know, he doesn't move off like a horse that's perfect. He moves off like a horse that has some things that bite at him a little bit, and he has to kind of warm through it until he gets to where he needs to be in his training.
You know, it's interesting. One of the gentlemen that's been with me on Past the Wire as a reader and a supporter and as a tracking trips member, Michael Snow brought something to my attention that I had also watched and saw. And it's interesting because what you said ties into it. You know, he had pointed out that Blazing Sevens, another Chad Brown runner for the Breeders' Cup, worked with Jack Christopher and looked like he was giving him all he could handle. And I watched it a couple of times and I said, you know, he's right. But my question was, does this kind of signal vulnerability of Jack Christopher, or Blazing Sevens is just really, you know, maybe blossoming? I mean, which way do I upgrade and downgrade based off that work, you know? And I think you kind of answered that indirectly without even knowing it was a question, that, you know, Jack Christopher might not be the best workhorse and maybe Blazing Sevens was giving him all he can handle because of that. So, you know, I still that it tells me who to upgrade or downgrade, but at least it offers an explanation and some insight into that.
I will say I watched Blazing Sevens work this morning and he was extremely impressive. So I think that horse has taken a big step forward off that last race. Understandably, he won in the slop against kind of a soft group. Forte's win last out. I mean, my pick, you know, as everybody loves to pick their Breeders' Cup winners a month in advance. My pick a month.
Not everybody, like everybody.
My pick was Loggins. I thought Loggins would have taken a massive step forward off that loss to Forte, especially first time. And he looked great in that race. So Loggins isn't in the race. Forte's in the race. Forte put in a very good work yesterday, but I will tell you, Blazing Sevens was very impressive this morning, and I think he's taken a big step forward. So I think Chad actually, and we'll see with Cave Rock. I know National Treasure, I saw his breeze this morning from Santa Anita. Baffert's put a slight blinker back on him to get him to focus up a little bit more. Bob said that in the last race, he took the blinkers off because he didn't want him too keen in the speed duel, wanted him to settle and kind of teach him to sit off horses. Now he's added the blinker back on and kind of sharpen him back up. So we'll see how Cave Rock comes. National Treasure looked good, but I think Blazing Sevens actually pushed his way into, hey, you know, it's not just a Forte, Cave Rock, you know, this horse actually looks like at the right time, he's coming into this race really, really well.
Yeah, and you know, credit where credit is due. You know, we know Bob Baffert's one of the best at getting a horse to peak at the right time and winning Breeders' Cup races. I'll say the same thing about Chad Brown. He's as good. I mean, he comes, you know, ready to dance to the big dance. I mean, he doesn't bring over short horses or horses that are not, you know, where they belong. So I would, without even asking him, know that he likely agrees with you, or else Blazing Sevens wouldn't be in the race. There are other spots for a 2-year-old at this time of year, and a lot of other options than to go for the, you know, Breeders' Cup Juvenile if you got any kind of setbacks. You mentioned something about Blazing Sevens' last win that I want to pull more information out of you on. You said it was an easy field and kind of a confidence builder. Going into a race like a Breeders' Cup, is it beneficial or is it a horse-to-horse thing? And what would you prefer, generally speaking, coming into this race, an easy confidence builder or a gutted out race like Forte ran against Loggins in that other race? I mean, which is more advantageous, and which do you, as a trainer, putting your trainer hat back on for a moment, which do you prefer? Which is more advantageous?
Maybe it's for the trainer, right? You know, you want to come in really feeling like you've got something. So I think a lot of it comes down to horse by horse. Do you want a horse that dominates? Yes, it takes a huge step forward for their confidence when they beat up on horses like that, because now that will carry into the next race. Now with babies, it can be a little bit funny. And you and I have talked about this with 2-year-olds who won easy, and then they face something that can actually push them, and then their confidence cracks a little bit. You don't see it as much.
1 second. 1 second. Okay, we are back on. Apologize for the delay. We are, you know, in still hurricane somewhat mode over here. A lot of interruptions, a lot of things going on in the backgrounds that you can't see, which is a good thing because it looks like a combat zone. But moving right along, we were talking about that confidence builder.
Yeah, I mean, I think personally with older boys, with the 3-year-olds, with the 4-year-olds, that confidence stuff carries weight. 2-year-olds, it does certainly, right? You want every horse that you take over to a race to feel like that they're on top of the world, right? Like they're the man.
Right.
The issue that tends to pop up with the babies is when they face somebody else who is the man. And sometimes, depending on a situation, and it depends on the horse, and this is where it could go either way, right? Some people could look at a race like what Forte ran in with Loggins and say, oh, that's going to take something out of it. I look at it in a way of, oh, he was pushed by a substantial horse and fought it out and won. And that helps him when another horse comes and runs at him and says, you know, he can kind of dig and say, oh, I got this, right? I just did it last race. That's a bigger confidence builder with some of these younger horses when they had to fight it out and they did win. Then sometimes when you have a baby that comes in off an impressive win, yes, he feels great. He takes a step forward. You know, he really feels like the man on the block. The question is, when he gets in a dogfight, does that confidence carry forward? And sometimes in babies, it can go either way. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it doesn't. And you see it lessen the more experienced horses who've been pushed over and over and over again, or fought it in races, or had things not go their way. When babies, you know, they're used to sometimes things going to plan, going their way. The ones that have more fight experience early, in my opinion, are the ones you really want to be looking at on Breeders' Cup Day, because now you're against the best babies in the country. You know, when you're looking at some of these other 2-year-old races throughout the season, you might face 1 or 2 horses that might end up in the Breeders' Cup. Now you're facing all of them. So right. I think with Blazing Sevens particularly, he's taken a step forward from a maturity standpoint as well. Forte, it'll be interesting to see if they get in a dogfight, how it works. I mean, again, and Chad might have done it as a confidence builder to break him off, or maybe he didn't want to work him with another horse, but Blazing Sevens worked by himself this morning. So, you know, here's Todd working his horses in company and making sure he's pushing them and keeping them where they need to be, and making sure that last work is another confidence builder where they win by a head or win by a neck in the work. And then Chad said, you know what? We're going to just let this horse have a complete confidence builder, which I liked with babies, of sometimes take them and let them do it themselves, because in a race, they're going to have to learn to run away from horses. You don't want them getting too used to being side by side. So I don't know if I answered the question. It's
You
dependent
did,
horse by
you
horse.
did, and it is a horse by horse thing, but that's good insight. Now, getting away from works a little bit, which we'll come back to. I got another thing I want to ask you, and you alluded to it earlier. The 2-turn mile at Keeneland, okay? The 2-turn mile and the 16th on the grass. The 1-turn 6 furlong, 7 furlong races, when Europeans a lot of times run those races straight, okay? How much goes into a horse's ability to run a mile at 1 turn as opposed to 2 turns? I mean, a mile is a mile. It's the same amount of distance whether you run it on an S, on an oval, straight, but some horses tend to do better in one scenario than another, 1 turn or 2 turns. Can you talk a little bit about why some horses do better at 2 turns or don't do as well as 2 turns, and what handicappers and people following and looking for insight at the Breeders' Cup and that edge can look for about how a European horse might run straight going 6 furlongs or 5 furlongs in the UK, and then here has to have a turn, might not handle it, and like Jack Christopher, undefeated at 1 turn, beaten at 2.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a little bit more running style, right? So actually interesting that you asked that question, because I just had a conversation with a client about an hour ago about a filly we claimed for him 2 weeks ago at Keeneland. Filly called Music City Star. She ran 4th in the Sugar Swirl last year, but she obliterated horses at a 1-turn mile and beat really good horses at a 1-turn mile, which is particularly why I wanted to claim her. And we claimed her, and Safi and I have discussed what we're pointing towards, which is a 1-turn mile stakes with her. Interesting with her, and I had the conversation and looking at it and saying, well, she's more 1-turn mile than she is 2-turn mile. And the owner said, can you explain that to me? And I said, well, look, 1-turn miles are run like sprints. You go hard from the gate, you go hard the entire race, and it's literally a sprinter who can extend their speed with stamina because they're just going flat out, right? You're really running that first half mile at a sprint pace. Then you hit the turn and you maintain, and then you kick again in the stretch. At least you try to, or you just keep trying to run when you're doing it on the dirt, right? When you run a 1-turn mile or 2-turn mile, you break from the gate and you find position in the first turn, okay? So you slow down a little bit, and then the horses get a slight, even though they're at a quicker pace, they get a slight breather down the backside, and then they pick it back up in the far turn and kick for home. So 1-turn miles and like 7 furlong sprints tend to be won by horses that are really fast, but just have a bit more stamina than a sprinter. Versus sometimes you can take a route horse that's good at 2 turns, that has a lot of natural speed, like a Life is Good, and cut them back in distance at a 1-turn mile, and they can still, I'm just trying to make sure it makes sense. There's no point in 1-turn races where a horse ever really settles and breathes. They're going as fast as they can, as far as they can, be it 1-turn mile or a sprint. 2 turns, you usually get that breather down the backside after you've found position in the first turn, and then you'll take a breather maybe from the 5/8 to the half-mile pole, and then you'll ask these horses to start working again.
Interesting. And that does really provide a good answer to the question in my opinion anyway.
I mean, John, you've watched a lot of races. I mean, does that seem
that's
what you've seen?
Yeah, no, that's spot on. I couldn't have explained it any better. And it's interesting because we're going to see a lot of that scenario play out, in the Breeders' Cup in both in both scenarios. Horses that are going to do better with the extra turn and ones that won't.
Well, and it's really almost like, if you think about it, right? Because you brake, and yes, you're braking, but you brake, and then as you enter that first turn, always, whether you're running a mile and a 16th, mile and a mile and a quarter, everybody has to find positioning going into that first turn. So a lot of horses are putting on the brakes, or other ones are sent. But even though the ones that are sent, once everybody finds positioning, the jock will try and give that horse a breather, because he had to use that horse up to get the positioning. Let's say you drew outside and you had to get near the front at the 1-turn mile, or the 2-turn mile, you're going to send them, but then you're going to try and find a point in the race where you can bring them back to you and just let them kind of take a breather down the backside before you ask them to accelerate again. But it's not that way when you're doing 1-turn races, because you're just same thing. And you see it in Dubai when you run the straight sprint race. Okay. That race is flat out on the dirt.
Right.
When you go 6 furlongs straight down the stretch, there is no, let me wait, let me see, let me tuck in. No. You're going as fast as you can, as far as you can. European sprints are a little bit different, where they'll brake, they're fast, but they still have another gear to shift into. They're well within themselves while sprinting on a straight, but they still have another gear to kick with. It's a little bit different with dirt. Dirt, you go. And when you're in a sprint, you go. There's no real breather in a sprint race. It's literally when the horse, and to put it in a sportsman's term, hits lactic acid threshold, right? Where they're just completely in anaerobic arrest and body's full of lactic acid, and they're completely fatigued and gassed and have nothing left. That's literally differences when we sprint on the dirt in America.
Right. Interesting. Going back to the works.
Yeah.
If you were talking to somebody that is watching workouts and reading workout reports, and again trying to get that edge for the Breeders' Cup as to who to like, who to not like, what are some of the key things that you would tell them to look for, both positive and negative? Like, watch out for this, maybe shy away if you see that, or if you see this, it's a plus. I mean, obvious, people think, oh, if a horse is working and he's under stout strength and really pulling and wanting to go and do more, automatic good thing. Fast work, bullet, people think automatic good thing. Maybe some of those things are not automatic good things. How did the horse go? Is that more important than how fast he went? Is pulling necessarily a good thing? Can it show that a horse might be a little rank, a little too keen? So on race day, you wind up having a. So what are some of the things, positive and negative, to look for the person who's not very seasoned at watching workouts?
Yeah, a lot of it comes down to your last work. These works in this final week, you are literally just, as I used to like to put it, letting air out of the tires. So most of these horses, you're trying to make sure that they peak on race day in terms of energy level. And I'm not talking, you don't want the tank overflowing. So if you have a horse that's too sharp, they'll get too excited in the paddock. They'll get too excited in the warm-up. They'll overwork themselves. So you're trying to get them to go over. And the best way to think about it is a guy in the Olympics running the 100-yard, the 100-meter sprint, right? They're calm, cool, collected, and they explode. You don't see any guy fidgeting and sweating and, upset. They've peaked their energy to the point to where they're relaxed enough to where they have enough to perform at top class, but not too much where they're just, it'd be like if you had 5 coffees and you're standing there at the line just waiting to go, you would have wasted a lot of energy to do that. So these last works are literally just trying to take a little bit out of the horse, but not too much, letting them stretch their legs, get over the track. And then you've got a 7-day buildup or 5-day buildup or 6-day buildup, however you've worked it, to have that horse's energy level right back where you wanted them for race day. Most of these works won't take anything out of a horse. If you have a horse potentially putting up a bullet work in their last work going into the Breeders' Cup, that's not necessarily a good thing in my book, right? you're asking that horse to do a little bit too much in its final prep to get there. So it's either done too much, you've let it do too much, or you're trying to make up for lost ground as you're going in the starting gate.
Right.
If you look, and you know, John talked about two guys that are phenomenal at peaking horses. Baffert is the main one that I would say most works. His second workout and his third workout are bullet works. Those horses have stiff works. The last work is usually easy. Now, if that horse happened chance put in a bullet work in their last workout in a Bob Baffert program, it's not because the horse was pushed. He always does in a final work, he tries to give them an easy workout. Some of his horses are just used to working fast, and so they put in a fast work. But you're not asking, you don't ever want to see a horse do too much. Rank horses, John, you know, if you have a rank horse going into a work in the Breeders' Cup, personally, I'd give them their head and let them do a little bit more because I have them too sharp. I need to take a little edge off that horse to get them where I need them on race day. Because if they're rank in the final work, well, it depends, two things, right? If it's a sprinter, and we saw it, he wasn't rank, but he wasn't easy in Best Pal's work on the grass. But that's just Best Pal. I mean, he's a great horse. He's a fast horse. They wanted to slow him down. He didn't do you know, the cones were out in the middle of the track. They're almost on the outside rail. And he went 103 and 1 for 5/8 on the grass going around the dogs. That horse does not run 5/8 in 103. So you're having to slow him down a lot to do that. He wasn't rank. He wasn't overly sweating. He wasn't overly fighting. He was fighting the rider and wanted his head a little bit, but it wasn't too much. Same thing at the beginning of Life is Good's work. She had his head cocked to the outside a little bit to make sure he broke off slower than he wanted to. And then she gradually let him out. And then he found his stride, and then he was perfectly fine, straightened up. So sprinters, if they're ranking their final work, not a huge deal. Route horses rank in their final work, and they did not get to do what they wanted to do. If you have them bubbling over on race day, that's a huge problem for a route horse because they'll be too keen, do too much too early in the race, and you'll have them a little bit empty. So for me, I don't quite look at times. I look at how they did it. And in the final work for the Breeders' Cup, I want that horse relaxed. I want to look and see if their ears are pricked and kind of looking around because their work is easy to them. You know, if their ears are glued back on their head and they're pinned and they're in with a work and a workmate, they're competitive. That's part of it. They're competitive, but it's also a sign that they might be having to push themselves to fight off the other horse. So if you look at Nest or even Malathaat, she was a prime example. She's in just like an open gallop. Malathaat just looked like she was galloping with her workmate. Didn't even look like she was trying. Workmate was there just to help her keep her timing, to keep her where he needs to keep her. But you don't want to look like you're asking that horse in that final work to do something. They should already be there. And if they're not there, you're not going to get them there by race day. You don't have enough time. So that's kind of what I look for is last work needs to be nice, easy, relaxed. Horse looks good. Horse didn't do too much. Horse bounces out of it. And then you're right on point where you need to be for race day.
Now I'm going to ask you another question. We're going to be a little politically and diplomatically correct about.
Okay.
But I think it's an important point that people should be aware of. Okay. And maybe it's not as bad as it was, and you'll be able to shed more light on it. I don't go out in the mornings a lot now and watch workouts. There was a time that I did. And one year I was up at Saratoga and I was watching workouts. And there was a Hall of Fame trainer who was still active today and still very competitive. And I'll go as far as to say it's someone that has horses in the Breeders' Cup, or at least a horse in the Breeders' Cup this year. So it's obvious he's not a kid because this was a long time ago. And they were sitting on a pony and they were watching some of their horses go out to the racetrack. Okay. And there was a clocker. Okay. And I don't know if he was a private clocker or a racing form clocker, but I know he was a clocker. He had his notes, is this, is that. The trainer knew who he was. It was a little bit annoying. And he asked the trainer who the horse was. And the trainer, who I did not know, you know what I mean? I was just standing there, threw a name out at the guy and said, okay, thanks. You know what I mean? And he started running and watching and clocking the horse. Okay. And the trainer looked at me and laughed and said, that's not who it is. It's so-and-so, and gave another name. And I just laughed. And I said, you know, we read these workouts and we look at them like they're, you know, the gospel.
Yeah.
And how accurate are they? How accurate are the people clocking them?
Yeah.
How many horses are they watching at the same time? Are they sure they got the right one? Now at the Breeders' Cup, I understand there's saddle cloths, there's names a little different, but I'm talking generally and on a daily basis. And even like you said before I asked you this, one goes, then there's another one. If your job was to get all of these times right and you're writing it down and clocking and writing down and clocking, and there's different horses from different barns are working at the same time, how accurate can that information really be?
Oh, it's complete. So here's the one thing, and it was very interesting. So there was a gentleman in California that wanted me to help him claim horses. And I'd spoken to him about workouts. And he says, you know, he'd send me these workout reports. And I'm like, I don't need the workout reports. He says, well, the workout reports are like, they're amazing in California. And they are, right? The guys, when I watch those workout reports of what they put out in California, right, it's pretty incredible of not times, but how the horses did their works. Like they're really doing their homework on what it's looking like. But I was a trainer. I know the works don't mean anything in a lot of situations. And the reason being is, you know, when you're working, and especially now that how we do it nowadays, where with the horse health and safety rules, they reserve at some tracks, specifically Santa Anita and Telmar, 10 minutes after the track opens, it's only for workers only. Okay. And then gallopers can come on and so on and so forth. So you'll see at Santa Anita a cavalry charge of like 40 horses just boom, go on the racetrack, and some will be working straight off and some will be backing up. But there are so many horses working that a lot of times some of these clockers are only catching the last quarter mile and they're multiplying. They're like, well, just double it, and that's the half mile. Or I was at Aqueduct. Depends. I was known for breezing horses fast, and people knew that. And I always believed how Baffert works horses was a great way to work horses. So I worked horses fast. We pushed them. But would I tell the clocker I was working 5/8 from the half mile pole because I didn't want a horse to look too fast on paper? Yeah, I did, right? I know he's going to gallop out in like 13 and change, but if he worked in 46, it gallops out in 13 and change, you know, I'm at a minute, which doesn't look too quick, but the work was really 46 and the horse galloped out a minute flat. So there's ways. And then there would be other ways where there was one work I remember. I had a filly. I told the jock, she just came into me from Florida. She was struggling down in Florida, and the owner sent her up to me. And I'd worked her once and she'd worked well. And I brought in a jockey and I said, just sit on her. Like, don't touch her. Just sit. I want to see what we've got. She went 45, 57, out in 113. I said, holy smokes. Called the owner. I said, I'm entering her for next week. Like, she's ready to go. And he said, well, she just got to you and she was running. I don't know the difference. Like, she worked and she won. She broke her maid in that race. But we put up the 6 furlongs in 113. We didn't put the 57 for 5/8. I mean, that would have looked nuts, you know? So it's, yes, as a trainer, you can sometimes hide a work. You can sometimes ask a clocker to change a work. The clockers can sometimes miss a work and you can give them a time. So the times on the works are not always accurate. And that's just something to understand, which is why when I go by looking at horses going to races, I rarely look at the times of how they breeze, especially going to the Breeders' Cup. I want to look at how they breeze. I throw the times completely out the window because you'll get a false sense. Now, granted, you said it with these Breeders' Cup horses, you're not fooling anybody. They all have numbers. They all have, they're being followed by cameras. There's people everywhere, and again, you're seeing people trying to work horses in the dark, but they're still catching them on video and saying, hey, look, so-and-so just went by and it's pitch black. And in most circumstances, you wouldn't have that. So yes, works are not always that accurate at most tracks across America. I've even seen what John alluded to of a horse breezing and a clocker giving the name of that horse instead of another horse, and that horse had a registered work that was not that horse. And I had that happen to a couple times to me.
No
it was
doubt.
Actually weird. I had an owner call me. I said, did you breeze my horse today? I said, I didn't breeze your horse today. I said, why? I said, I just got a notification that it worked. I said, what the hell? So I called the clocker. I'm like, who is this? Who'd you clock? Well, I thought that was your horse that worked. I said, no, it wasn't my horse. They said, well, I had a red saddle towel on it. I had this. I said, that wasn't my horse. So I don't know who either gave you the name or what, but you made a mistake on that one. So
it's funny that you say that. Reminds me of the day that I was walking into Gulfstream Park, running a horse that I had claimed for $62,500, which was an expensive claim. And you got to realize this is going back to the early 90s when I owned horses. So that was even a more expensive claim back then, And I wouldn't say it was if we were running her back first time off the claim. I wouldn't say we were sorry we claimed her. We were hoping she would run well. She was running in an allowance race. It was a tough spot at Gulfstream in the championship meet. We had claimed her from Alan Jerkins, which is not a good guy to claim from.
Right.
Give a lot away. And we were hoping she would run well, but we certainly didn't love her, And I walked into the racetrack, and a very sharp bettor that I knew that is very well respected comes over to me. Now, my horses ran under a stable name. They didn't run under my name, and I never told a lot of people it was my stable. If you were one of my close friends, you knew. Otherwise, you have never known. And if I've got 25 win pictures on my wall, I might be into them. You know what I mean? I even went into win pictures. I just sat there and mind my business. Anyway, guy comes over to me and says, listen, I got a horse for you today that is not going to lose. They love the horse. The owner flew in from New York just to bet and watch the horse run and get his picture taken. Now, I was already living in Florida and I was the owner, but I don't know yet. He's talking about my horse. So he tells me the horse. He goes, this horse, Flippy, will not get beat. They love her. Okay, bet whatever you want. I didn't have a heart to tell the guy, listen, I'm the owner. I'm the guy that claimed this filly for 62,000. That's my 62.5 that you see in the racing form. And I don't intend to bet a nickel on her, So, and I already live in Florida. I drove 20 minutes here from my house.
Yeah.
I didn't have the heart to tell him. She didn't win. She had 3 lengths turning for home and just ran out of gas. But just reminds me of that. But the best workout story that I can possibly tell you is Madam Justice. I will give you the name of the horse. I've said this before on one of my other shows. I don't believe in information. Everybody loves their horse. Trainers talk about horses like parents talk about their kids. They never gauge the competition. You could love your horse. Somebody else could love their horse more. And who knows who's going to win. Somebody who doesn't like their horse can jump up and beat you all. Information, there's no such thing as a tip. Anybody thinks that, should be listening to W.C. Fields as far as I'm concerned. Sucker born every minute. Madam Justice was different. Could have got beat, but here's what was different. Ruben, my friend, was an exercise rider for years and years and years. Loved 1,000,000 horses that he got on. Was batted 1,000%, never right. Never get. Now, I don't listen anyway, but it would come to me, you got to bet this horse today. I get on this filly. Oh, she's so good. Oh, this colt is so good. They love this one. Oh, this one's going to win. This one. I would say 5-6 years, maybe 50 horses, 0 win percentage. Never right. Okay. One day it was Belmont in the summertime, getting ready to go to Saratoga. The excitement's building in the air. Still good horses running at Belmont back then. You know, the Suburban, the 4th of July. You know, I had big races back then, leading up to Saratoga as well. And it was that time of year where the summer racing, you know, Belmont Stakes was probably over, but it was right around that time where it was, you know, really heating up. He comes over to me and he goes, "You got to bet this horse next week." I'm like, "Ruben, you've been telling me this for years." No. He goes, "Please, you're my good friend, like my brother. You must bet this. You bet big. I know it. You bet this horse big, you're gonna win." I'm like, "Ruben, was this another one you get on?" He goes, No, I never get on this horse." I'm like, "So what are you telling me? It's a horse that some other exercise rider idiot tells you?" Like, he goes, No, I don't know the guy get on. I never talked to him." I'm like, "Well, what are you telling me?" He goes, "I'm telling you, she will win." I'm like, "Okay, you want to give me a little enlightenment? How do you know she's gonna win, Ruben?" "You want to know how I know?" He goes, "Because they never put this horse work in the paper. They give her name, it's another horse." I'm like, "Well, then she doesn't work out?" He goes, "No, she work out all the time." He goes, "She work out 4 in the morning, nobody at the barn, nobody see, pitch black. Trainer tells the guy, don't say nothing to nobody. I know she's going to win. I worked that barn 10 years. Never do they do this." I'm like, "Seriously?" He said, "Yes, she will win." I said, "I kind of like the story. I kind of like it." Tough maiden special weight race, Belmont 5 furlongs. Okay. Looks like she should have been 10, 15 to 1, not bred, super special. Antonio Grael, who was a good, you know, veteran type of journeyman rider, but he wasn't Cordero, Vasquez, Maple, the guys that took all the money back then. Back then, you had all those homebreds in the maiden special weight races. 7 to 1, which made me go, somebody betting on her. You know what I mean? So I bet on her. She win by 5, Madam Justice. Worked out 4 in the morning before anybody was there, consistently. It was the only, Ruben, I love him to this day. I'm still friends with him. It's the only time he's ever been right. I would say if he was on the show with us, and it was a Philly, he never even got on that they were working out early in the morning. And it was a very high profile bond. So it's not like a bond you would think really is a betting bond, wanted to put one over. So the back story, I don't know, but she won.
But you hit that nail right on the head, and it's very interesting that you say that, right? So, you know, I was never a guy who bet on my horses. You know, I knew who would win, but I always felt that I was terrible luck, that as soon as I put money on, they'd run poorly. So I stopped. I never did. But why is the question? Why trainers hide works, change numbers, change whatever, right?
Right.
So you do have a lot of trainers, and we talked about this on the show previously, John, if trainers only make money when they win or when they, you know, hit the board and earn money with their horses. The day rate doesn't cut it. So you have a lot of trainers who bet on horses. So they want to get as high odds as they can, knowing that they got a shot to win. So yeah, you'll give them the 5/8 instead of the half mile. You'll do this. For me, when I trained, it was typically because it was a horse I didn't want to get claimed. So
Right.
I'd have a horse and I'm like, yeah, damn it, the horse worked pretty well. But I mean, I like this horse. Like, I think I can win and bring it back and maybe get another race under his belt. Like, I don't want to lose this horse. So let me figure out, I'm going to breeze it half. I'll tell him to clock at 6. You know, or I'll tell it to, you know, and then the horse walks over, has got like a 114 work for 6 furlongs. Everybody's like, gosh, this thing's a pig. And the horse runs really well, and I get him to come home to my barn, right? So it depends. There's different reasons why trainers do it. Some are trying to get a big odd to make a score. Others, in my shoes, didn't want to lose certain horses, so we didn't want, you know, and again, if I knew what I knew now, I wouldn't have breezed my horses so fast, because the amount of times I was heckled by the Jamaicans at Belmont for walking over a 6-5,
Oh, I
4-5
love those guys.
first.
They're some of the best hecklers, though. That
Oh,
guy on the rail at Belmont that sit right up on
oh
the.
yeah, oh yeah.
Those guys have been there. I just want to let you know those guys, and I knew some of them. One of them, Joe, was actually became a dear friend of mine over years and years and years. Used to bet at my dad's window, and then I wound up seeing him in Florida when I moved to Florida. And it was like,
Yeah,
those guys have been there.
yeah.
I've been going to Belmont since the 70s, and they
Yeah.
were there then.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? And they could make the place stink of marijuana through the whole building.
oh, for sure,
Yeah,
for
I mean,
sure.
the whole building, man.
But you will feel, and it is the one thing, you know, because I'd have maidens, you know, or I'd have first time starters, and I was notoriously horrible with first time starters because I never had enough horses to where I could have horses at the same stage to where I could really kind of drill them in company and drill them down and tighten them and have them ready to win first time out. I might have a baby that came in 2 weeks after another one, and that one's really at 3/8, and this one's almost, you know, it's at a half mile. And so I'm trying to balance and trying to make sure that each baby's getting what they need to go forward. But I never had it where you have like a Pletcher barn or a, you know, Brad Cox or Chad Brown or some of these larger barns where you've got 12 babies or 14 babies all at the stage of ready to run, and you're drilling them to try and tighten those things down. But the work patterns look great on a lot of my horses. So they'd walk in and here's a first time starter for Michael Wilson. Gosh, that horse worked 59 flat or 59 and 3, 5/8 at Aqueduct. Gosh, we're going to hammer this horse. I'd walk over 6-5. I'm like, oh my God, this is embarrassing. And
People
the horse,
pick up work patterns. You know, they do. There were certain trainers, okay. You know, Bill Mott was one, and now he's kind of got a little bit more attention. But people used to say Bill Mott never wins first time out, and that wasn't true. And I noticed, you know, it doesn't work anymore now because people kind of know that he does win first time out. But he used to have certain things he did in his work patterns, and it wasn't the time, okay? It was the spacing and the distance of the last work. And when he had that certain profile, when the works were done in a certain way and the last one was at a certain distance, his win percentage was actually very high. But you would never be able to pick that up unless you were really digging deep. So we had like a 5% win percentage first time out, and people would say, guy never wins. And I used to say, but when he does this, this, and this, check those 3 boxes, his win percentage is 26% first time out. All of a sudden, the whole picture changed, you know?
Yeah.
And there are a lot of guys like that. And once you pick up on those tells, you know, you said about, you know, claiming and not wanting to lose horses. Back in the day, there was a trainer named Vinnie Blangs. You probably never heard of him before your time.
Okay.
Trained at Suffolk Downs, okay?
Okay.
Was known for cheap horses with a lot of problems. Okay, they were
Right.
just known for that. But in the winter, a lot of Suffolk guys back then, Suffolk is now closed, a lot of those guys used to winter at Gulfstream in the championship meet, you know? And Gulfstream was always a weird championship meet because it had the good elite horses that wintered there, and also a lot of cheap claimers that were there for the winter from tracks like Suffolk, okay? And Vinnie Blangs, it reminds me of the movie Rounders when Matt Damon picked up on Teddy KGB's tail with the Oreo cookies and just ate them for lunch, you know?
Yeah.
I used to make a fortune with this guy, Vinnie Blangs, because I picked up on something that he did every winter at Gulfstream Park, and it was like money in the bank. I knew he was a sharp claiming trainer, and he was hard to figure out, but eventually I realized it, and it was very simple once you knew it, just like the Oreos with KGB. Once you know, it was gold, okay? And if this was back then, I would never be saying this on the air. But what he would do is, when he would drop a horse at Gulfstream, okay, and they were all braided nice, and the mane was done up, and they were dry and looking muscular and looking good, and the coat was good, and they were groomed, and everything was perfect.
He was selling them.
They get bet, they never win. Right? They'd get claimed, they'd be shaken for them, they'd get claimed, they'd maybe 8-5, they'd never win. Okay. Then he would drop one, okay, off a horrible race that looked terrible, was soaking wet. I'd see them hosing them down. I'm like, that ain't even sweat. They're hosing this horse down, okay?
Right.
Lather all over him, bandaged like bandages on top of the bandages, you know what I mean? Tongue tied wrong, hanging out, just everything you could possibly do to make this unattractive, okay? 12-1, completely wins by 5, not claimed. You know what I mean? And I'd be like, this guy does this 3/4 every winter. You know what I mean? And he run a bunch of horses. And once I figured it out, I would bet. I wouldn't even leave the window. I'd bet. I'd watch the race with my arm on the cashier's window, just watching the race, just hand them the ticket back. It was literally that easy.
Yeah.
Vinny Blanks, may he rest in peace. I'm sure he's probably not around anymore. He was old then. But very, very sharp horseman. And obviously there were horses he didn't want to lose and that he did want to lose. And, you know, that's how he played the game. And once I figured it out, it was, you know, you didn't need a racing form, really. You know, it was that reliable. But
well, and that's the thing, and it's very interesting, you know, and it's something to touch on, right? So a lot of maybe people see the game a little bit too straight of trainers do this and then this happens. There's certain situations, like you might ask me the question of, well, if you knew the horse wasn't ready, why didn't you take more time with it? And there'd be pieces where I'd say, well, I need to get a race in this horse because my real goal is Saratoga, or my real goal is X. But you also have the other situations which happen in even Hall of Fame barns of an owner wants the horse to run. The horse might not be ready, but the owner wants the horse to run, and they're breathing down your neck, and they've got the condition book, and it's, well, next week there's a race, and next week there's a race. Can we run it? You've breezed 2.5 miles. Can we run it? And so in certain scenarios where you're saying, like when Belmonte does 1, 2, 3, these horses are going to win. There might be other scenarios with other horses where the owners just want them to run. So he's like, yeah, it's good enough. And we'll just give it a race, and then we'll move on and we'll go on to the next thing. So it's different things. And you see it in Saratoga with Chad and Todd. Those owners want to win at Saratoga. That's why those horses are geared up for those meets. That's why they're cranked and ready to win. Most of those owners really want to win on the big stage in Saratoga. And it's peaks and valleys. You know, when you peak a horse to win at Saratoga, then the valley is they might not run well for a certain period of time. And then, as you know, with Todd picks back up at the Gulfstream meet, right? They'll crank them up, run the barn runs well. And it was interesting. And look, I'm not knocking him. I think his horses look amazing going into this Breeders' Cup. And he's got several horses in several divisions, like Annapolis worked on the grass today. He looked amazing. You know, he's got these groups of horses coming into the Breeders' Cup, and somebody was talking about, gosh, he's got quite a hand to play. I said, no, he's got a phenomenal hand to play. And he's got great horses coming in the right way in the Breeders' Cup. And I said, but so does Asmussen. Asmussen's got quite a group coming in as well. And so does so-and-so. They've got quite a group coming in as well. And they said, yeah, but Todd's, and I said, here's the one thing. And it's probably going to be different this year. But for years, Todd had a ton of horses with a very good hand going into the Breeders' Cup. And if you look at the record of what he showed up with and how many he ran and how many he won, it's not on par with some of these other guys who I ran 8 and I won 5.
Right. And he had that same problem with, I mean, you got to give it to him now, and it's no knock at all because he's one of the best. And
absolutely. I mean, I think
he had that long Kentucky Derby drought where he had a ton of Derby starters, many of whom looked live, and took a long time to get that win. You know what I mean? So, you know, the Breeders' Cup is tough. Let me ask you this: are any of the European horses on the grounds? Have you seen any of them? Or they're all, I think, shipping in now, right? They're coming in late.
Yeah. I haven't seen any of them yet breezing. I've been trying to keep an eye out for them. There's so many horses running around where I'm like, who's that? Which saddle tall is that? Which is this? I haven't seen any of them pop out yet. So I agree with you. The quarantine barn was well, they shipped it They shifted the quarantine barn the other day, but I have not seen anybody yet. I'm
I
guessing
know,
that
Aiden O'Brien's horses, say what you want. Every one of them looks like $1 million, and they all got that same gait, and they all prance the same way, and they go out like they're so well trained and so well schooled and so prepared. I mean, it's really hard to get a gauge on them, in my opinion, because they just all look the part. You know what I mean? And sometimes he comes even not with his best string,
Yeah.
and still they win the beauty contest every year, and they just come out in that parade, and every year you just you have to
Well,
be
what Coolmore was very good at before was they knew, and this is where the games changed a little bit in the United States. Coolmore knew that they could bring the second string and still win.
right.
They never brought the best. Giants Causeway was probably one of the few in circumstances where, in Johannesburg, but there was only a handful of times where when Coolmore came over, you knew it was their best. Usually it was the second stringer, and they'd bring the horses over and they'd still win. They'd clean up, and then we've had other fillies in the past, like Enable, or you've had Miesk, and you had Goldakova, and you had some of these top Europeans come over, and they were just heads and tails above. But for years, Coolmore kind of would bring the second string and be really competitive and do really well or win. But now you've got Godolphin saying, you know what? Why don't we bring over some of the first stringers? What we've got first stringers that are really good.
Oh, they've upped the game, no doubt about it. Yeah, they definitely upped the game on them for sure.
Yeah, and so it's interesting coming over and seeing them now with Godolphin's success over the last several years, being like, hey, you know what? He's not the best horse, but he's still first string division, and we'll take him over. Like Modern Games is a fine example of that, right? Every time he comes to the United States, he crushes it. And he runs well in Europe. He's a top class horse in Europe, but he comes here and he's just a beast. So it'll really be interesting seeing Aiden's horses come over. It'll be interesting seeing, the Godolphin horses come over. It's always fun when they show up. And that's really my question. And I haven't dug deep enough. So don't take anything that I say as gospel right now. Golden Pal, phenomenal horse, undefeated in the United States. Every time he leaves the United States, he gets beat in Europe. He breezed extremely well today. My question is, which European sprinters come over? Because the question I have that I'd love to see with this horse, and he's a beautiful horse. He's a horse that I'd love to send mares to breed to. Is he the best of the United States? And does he lose in Europe because he's just the best of the United States? Or is it a situation where he doesn't handle the European tracks, but he's still a phenomenal horse, both here, and it'll be interesting to see who comes over to face him.
And it also goes back to something we touched on earlier. The races he's lost in Europe are straight.
Great.
Here he gets that turn.
Yeah. And he's the type of horse that we know he puts away horses early. He goes to the lead and then go catch it.
Yeah. No, he's interesting. Well, I think a lot to be gained from this episode. As always, a pleasure.
Yeah, for sure. I have copious notes. On these horses. I'll post them online or something just to see.
Well, if you want to run down, if you got notes on any horses, let's get them out there. Run, give us a rundown, man. That's gold.
So we talked about Blazing Sevens. He's very impressive, very smooth and fluid today. Slammed, I liked in her work. I thought she worked really well. I think she's coming in it the right way. Christina Oliveras mentioned it on the broadcast that in the San Bernardo, that she's rushed off her feet a little bit, but she fully rebounded in the TCAA, whatever they call that race here. We talked about Jack Christopher. We talked about Life is Good. Talked about Flightline. Nest worked really well today. She looked great in company. Basically, it seemed like an easy tune-up work. Obviously, last week they breezed her with Malathat. This week they split those two fillies apart and had them work with different company, and both did really well. Taiba will be interesting. I watched his work this morning from Santa Anita, and they asked Baffert and it's the same gauge. he's not a workhorse, right? So he just does as much as his company will do. That's
Right.
literally what he does. But he looked very good in his work. And as a horse that we're talking about, I mean, is Flightline of a different caliber? Probably. Well, yes. But it'll be very interesting the step forward that Taiba will make in this start. But the one horse that I thought was quite interesting is, it looks like Hot Rod Charlie gained a little confidence out of that last race. I don't think he's good enough to tackle this classic field by any means, but he looks like a horse with a bit more pep in his step. He seems to have a little bit more confidence about him after finally getting a win back on his resume. Right. So that was interesting to kind of see. But yeah, we covered most of these horses. I was going through everybody else trying to figure out. I mean, between the last 2 days, there's been 30 plus horses that have breezed. So getting through all of them is a little daunting.
All right. Well, I'll be out there with you this week, and we'll point out some other interesting things that we see, and we'll try and spot some pros, and we'll be a little different and also spot some cons, because everybody likes to talk about the pros and who's doing great. So maybe we could spot a couple of that are not looking as good as
the throwouts.
Breeders' Cup winners should be. Right. Yeah. No. A throwout's as good as a throw in. Maybe
this is what's interesting, and we touched on 2 fillies that Todd's bringing in. And everybody's talking: is it Nest or is it Malafat? Who's winning? Is it Nest or Malafat? And both those fillies are doing phenomenal. But nobody's talking about the filly that I saw this morning who looks incredible.
Which is Clariere. Don't say nobody's talking about her.
Huh?
I am. If it's Clariere, I'm talking about her.
Society.
Oh, okay. No, I like her too. Yeah, she's.
I mean, she really looks like she's taken the step forward in the right direction and coming into this great. I mean, Clariere looked great this morning as well. So I mean, Asmussen's got quite the hand in the distaff as well. It's not just. I don't think you can just pin a hat on it and say Todd. I think Nest is she's proven it. She's phenomenal. But what Society did at Parks and what she looks like now, this could actually be another filly that could potentially give Nest a run for her money. This is a filly that could be stepping into that air with those fillies, because she's a late maturing gun runner that's just maturing at the right time.
Yeah, no, and listen, I bet her in Saratoga when she had trouble out of the gate and should have went to the lead against these kind of fillies. And I said to my friend, that morning, this filly could wind up as good as any of these, and she just didn't get out of the gate that day, but hasn't lost since. So yeah, no, I agree. Excited. All right, I think that's a wrap. What do you think?
You don't want to do all the Breeders' Cup horses every single race, horse by horse. You don't want to take 5 hours. No, I'm just kidding.
I don't think anybody would, as much as some people may like us, I don't think anybody would want to spend that much time today with us. So
yeah, sounds good.
I think we'll let them off the hook, especially since we got a lot more stuff coming their way. So
for sure,
we don't want to play it out. Thank you to Forza Bloodstock, Michael Wilson, AmWager, some of the best tools in the game where you can bet the Breeders' Cup and more. A lot more coming. Boots on the ground, big time we will have. And I guess that's a wrap. Ciao for now.
Yeah, see you. Thanks so much.
Tracking trips with Pick Six King John Stettin. It's one of the best tools in horse racing for any level of player. It's your second set of eyes, spotting troubled trips, betting angles, track trends, horses to watch and favorites to fade, 10 figs, ticket structure, and more. At Tracking Trips, you're a friend with benefits. Not a member? You must hate winning money. Join Tracking Trips now. Visit pastthewire.com and we'll see you in the winner's circle. Remember, nobody does it better.
Nobody does it better.